Hey everyone, welcome to the channel where I share creepy and scary stories that will give you chills. If you love horror and spooky tales, make sure to subscribe and join me every week for a new story. Let's get into the dark side together. The town of Merrow's Hollow had always seemed like the kind of place where nothing extraordinary could ever happen. Surrounded by thick pines and folded into the shadow of the mountains, its streets were quiet, its people reserved. Outsiders often remarked that the silence of the town felt heavier than in other places, as though the air itself carried a weight it could not shrug off. At the very heart of Merrow's Hollow lay Blackthorn Lake, a body of water, so still it seemed to swallow sound. During the day, it reflected the trees and clouds with a glass-like perfection that drew the occasional painter or tourist. But the locals never set foot near its banks after dusk. They avoided the lake the way a man avoids a grave of someone who died violently, out of respect, out of fear. No one spoke of it openly, but there were stories. An old fisherman once claimed he saw something moving beneath the surface, shapes that mimicked swimmers, though no one had entered the water. Children whispered about pale hands rising from the depths, reaching, clawing, before dissolving back into the ripples. And the oldest tale of all said that the lake was a mirror between worlds, one that sometimes showed not the truth, but what lingered on the other side. On the night of October's first frost, the rumors stirred again. Emily Carter walked home from her late shift at the diner, pulling her jacket tighter as a chill seeped into her bones. She took the long route that curved past the lake, though she told herself she didn't know why. Perhaps it was curiosity. Perhaps it was the way the moon, round and bright, hung over the treeline like a silver lantern. When she reached the wooden railing overlooking Blackthorn Lake, she paused. The water gleamed like polished obsidian, yet beneath its stillness, faint light flickered, red, pulsing, like embers smoldering in the dark. Emily frowned, leaning closer. That was when she saw it, her reflection, but not as it should be. The face in the water did not move with hers. When she tilted her head, the reflection tilted a moment too late, its smile curling wider than her own. The eyes were darker, hungrier, as if something inside them watched her with a patience that was not human. Emily gasped and stepped back, nearly tripping over the damp earth. The reflection remained, grinning up at her, even though she had turned away. And then, just before the ripples swallowed it, the reflection raised its hand and pressed a finger to its lips' point 2 days later. Emily did not show up to her shift at the diner. Her phone rang endlessly, her apartment door was locked, and her car remained parked out front. The sheriff organized a search party, and for 3 nights they combed the woods, their lanterns bobbing between the trees. But no footprints, no torn clothing, no signs of struggle were found. Only her scarf, floating by the edge of Blackthorn Lake, damp and cold. The townsfolk whispered again. They said it had started. The reflection had chosen. That night, as the town tried to settle into uneasy sleep, the lake stirred. The surface rippled though no wind touched it. Shapes moved in the water, rising, growing clearer. For a moment, dozens of faces stared upward from beneath the surface, their features twisted, bleeding at the edges of recognition. They were not strangers. They were the people of Merrow's Hollow. And one by one, their mirrored selves smiled. The air in Merrow's Hollow thickened with unease. The town had seen its share of disappearances before, but Emily Carter's case felt different. The scarf by the lake was not a clue. It was a warning. Sheriff Douglas Kane leaned over the diner counter, his weather hands wrapped around a mug of black coffee. He hadn't slept in 2 days, and the deep shadows beneath his eyes made him look decades older. Across from him sat Father Brennan, the town's priest, his face pale as chalk. "You believe those old stories, don't you?" the sheriff asked quietly. Father Brennan did not look up from his folded hands. "I don't just believe them, Sheriff. I've seen the lake's work before. Long ago." The sheriff wanted to dismiss the words as superstition, but deep down, he knew Brennan wasn't lying at the edge of town in a small, dimly lit apartment. Clara Jennings sat by her vanity, brushing her hair. She was one of Emily's closest friends and had spent the last few nights searching until exhaustion pulled her home. The brush stilled in her hand when she noticed something strange in the mirror. Her reflection blinked. Clara hadn't. At first, She thought fatigue was playing tricks on her, but the reflection's lips curved into a sly smile, one Clara herself had not made. Slowly, the mirrored version of her leaned closer, pressing its forehead against the glass as though testing the boundary. Clara's breath caught in her throat. She dropped the brush. Then, with a soft crack, a hairline fracture spread across the glass. Her reflection's grin widened, splitting unnaturally, teeth too sharp, eyes too dark. And when Clara staggered backward, the reflection reached forward and tapped the other side of the mirror with one long, pale finger. The glass trembled like water. The next morning, the neighbors found Clara's apartment door ajar. Inside, the brush lay on the floor, the mirror shattered, but Clara herself was gone. What they didn't notice, what none of them could have known, was that Clara did walk out of that room. But it wasn't Clara. On the quiet streets of Merrow's Hollow, a figure moved with her face, her walk, her smile. Only the eyes betrayed the truth. A shadow swam within them, a dark shimmer like rippling water. It passed neighbors without a word, and though something about her seemed off, no one dared ask, because deep inside, they already knew it to be why the third day, strange things spread through town. Windows warped with faces that weren't their own. Shopkeepers swore their reflections whispered when no one was near. Children saw themselves waving from puddles in the street. Father Brennan called it the First Awakening. "They are crossing through," he told Sheriff Kane grimly, gripping his rosary so tightly the beads cut his palm. "Once the first one walks, others will follow. The lake's hunger has no end." That night, by Blackthorn Lake, the fog rolled thick across the water. The moonlight revealed a lone figure standing at the bank. She wore Clara Jennings' face. But when she turned toward the water, dozens of other reflections leaned upward, pressing against the surface as though begging to be let free. And Clara, whatever she was now, smiled, raised her hand, and beckoned them forward. The glassy water rippled. The barrier was thinning. The silence of Black Hollow was no longer ordinary silence. It was a silence that pressed against the eardrums, suffocating, as though the entire town was holding its breath. The townsfolk moved about their routines with darting eyes, and even the bravest among them found excuses not to wander near the lake after sundown. Yet the whispers spread faster than the fog. "Did you hear about old Mrs. Whitmore?" Someone muttered in the general store. "They say she was seen walking the streets last night, but she's been dead for a week." The rumors piled up like rot on the edges of every conversation. A fisherman swore his reflection smiled at him, even though his own lips never moved. A young boy, no older than 10, told his mother that another version of her was standing in his bedroom doorway. The mother dismissed it as imagination until she herself saw her double peering at her through the frosted bathroom mirror. Elias, who had been among the first to witness the shimmering glow of the lake, now avoided mirrors altogether. He covered the one in his bedroom with an old sheet and stopped glancing at shop windows when he walked past them. The reflection was always there, waiting, always just a little wrong, the mouth too wide, the eyes too still, the head tilting at unnatural angles. One evening, as the last embers of sunlight drowned beneath the horizon, screams erupted from the northern edge of town. Elias rushed toward the noise with a handful of others, their lanterns bobbing wildly as they cut through the darkness. They found Harold, the town's blacksmith, sprawled in the dirt. His body was a mess of torn flesh and broken bone, but what stole the breath from Elias's throat was the sight of another Harold standing above the corpse. The double grinned, face slick with blood, then dissolved into a mist of crimson light that hissed back toward the lake. Someone dropped their lantern. Someone else began to pray. Elias only whispered one thing, over and over, though no one heard him. "They're coming for all of us." The library in Black Hollow was a crumbling stone building that smelled of mildew and forgotten paper. Few ever entered it, save for Elias, who now pushed open its warped doors with trembling hands. Behind him followed Clara, a schoolteacher whose sister had vanished by the lake, and Jonah, a farmer who claimed to have seen his dead father knocking at his window. The librarian, a frail woman named Mrs. Kavanaugh, lifted her head as they approached. Her eyes were milky with age, but her voice was sharp. "You're looking for answers, aren't you? Everyone who comes here eventually is." Elias nodded. The lake, the reflections. We need to know how it started. Mrs. Kavanaugh sighed, then led them into the archives, a basement where dust hung thick in the air and the shelves bowed under the weight of neglected tomes. She pulled out a leather-bound ledger, its cover blackened by time. This town was built on a promise, she said, but promises made in blood always find a way back. They read by lantern light. The ledger spoke of the town's founders, settlers who arrived 2 centuries ago, desperate to survive the harsh winters. They turned to an ancient ritual whispered about by the indigenous tribes, a ritual that bound prosperity to the waters of Black Hollow Lake. Blood was spilled into the waves, and with it, the settlers asked for protection, growth, and longevity. For a time, the ritual worked. Crops flourished, winters were mild, and disease seemed to skip over the settlement. But in the margins of the ledger were frantic scrawls, written by a trembling hand. The lake remembers. The lake keeps what we owe. The lake takes us back, one by one, in the form of our own faces. Clara's face drained of color. So the reflections are not just illusions. They're debt collectors. Jonah slammed the book shut. Then we must find a way to break it. If our ancestors made this pact, maybe there's a way to end it. But Mrs. Kavanaugh only shook her head. You can't break a mirror without cutting yourself. The debt must always be paid. Outside, the wind howled, carried with the faintest sound of laughter. Too human, yet too hollow to belong to the living. Night fell on Black Hollow like a suffocating shroud, thicker than the usual fog. But this night carried something else. Movement in the streets, figures gliding through the mist with footsteps that echo wrong, like with splitting or glass cracking. Elias, Clara, and Jonah huddled in the parlor of an abandoned house near the church. Their lantern was dim, the flame flickering against warped wallpaper. Every shadow seemed alive. Then a sound. Tap, tap, tap. Clara stiffened. The window. They turned, and through the glass they saw themselves. Not one reflection, but 3. Elias with hollow, sunken eyes. Clara with a smile far too wide. Jonah with blood dripping endlessly down his chest. The reflections pressed their palms to the glass. The window pane began to frost over, though the night was warm. Jonah cursed and pulled the curtains shut, but the tapping only grew louder, moving along the walls. Footsteps creaked on the porch. Outside, screams rose from the town square. Dozens of voices, then silence, then laughter. Elias forced himself to peek through a crack in the curtain. What he saw made by a rise in his throat. The square was filled with them, dozens of reflections, identical yet warped, moving in jerks like puppets with tangled strings. They tore through homes, dragging screaming men and women into the streets. Each victim was held still as their reflection stepped out of shadows and pressed itself against them. For a moment, flesh and shadow merged, and then the human body collapsed into nothing but blood-streaked glass shards that dissolved into mist. Clara whispered, "They're replacing us." Suddenly, the church bell tolled. It hadn't rung in years. Every reflection froze, heads snapping toward the sound in unison. Elias gripped Clara's arm. The bell tower, it might be the only place left. We have to move. Jonah looked pale but nodded. They slipped into the back alleys, moving quickly, keeping low. But every reflective surface, puddles, windows, even shards of broken bottles, seemed to watch them. Elias swore he saw his own twisted smile grinning up from the water at his feet. By the time they reached the church doors, the streets were slick with blood and eerily quiet again. Elias pushed open a heavy wooden door, and as it groaned on its hinges, he realized with horror that inside, every wall was lined with mirrors. The church door slammed shut behind them, the echo rolling like thunder through the hollow nave. Elias held his lantern high, its weak glow struggling to cut through the dust and cobwebs. Everywhere, mirrors. Tall, narrow panes lined the walls like silent sentinels, some cracked, others clouded with age, but all alive with faint movement. Their reflections stared back, dozens of Elias, Clara, and Jonah staring in distorted silence. Clara's breath quickened. Why are there so many? Jonah spat on the stone floor. Old superstition. They thought mirrors kept away evil. Looks like it invited it in. As they edged forward, the lantern light flickered. In the glass, Elias saw his double smile, but Elias himself hadn't moved. He froze. Slowly, the reflection raised a finger to its lips. Sure. Elias stumbled back, nearly dropping the lantern. Did you see that? Clara turned, her face pale as bone. Mine, just whisper my name. The air grew colder. From every mirror came faint whispers, layered and overlapping, as though hundreds of voices were speaking at once. The words were indistinct, but they carried a terrible weight. Promises, bargains, threats. Suddenly, one mirror near the altar rippled like water. Out stepped a figure, a perfect copy of Elias, but its eyes were pits of endless black. It tilted its head and spoke in a voice that was both Elias's and something far older. You don't belong here. You were given life borrowed from us, and now the debt must be paid. Jonah drew the hunting knife he always carried, his hands trembling. Stay back. The reflection only smiled wider, and from surrounding mirrors, hands began to emerge, long, pale fingers dragging across the stone floor, reaching. Clara screamed as one hand grasped her ankle, its grip like ice. She kicked free, leaving bruises already forming on her skin. Elias hurled the lantern at the nearest mirror. It shattered in a burst of fire and smoke, the glass melting into a pool of black liquid. For a moment, the whispers stopped, but then every other mirror in the church trembled violently. Cracks spiderwebbed across their surfaces, and from within, shapes began to push outward. Dozens of them. Jonah swore under his breath. We're not getting out of here alive, are we? Elias clenched his fists, jaw tight. Not unless we end this where it began. The lake. The storm had raged on tonight, but by morning the air outside was unnervingly still. The silence made every creak in the apartment sound louder, sharper, like the building itself was alive. Elif avoided the bathroom mirror, choosing instead to wash her face in the kitchen sink. But even there, the window caught her reflection. At first glance, it looked normal, tired eyes and pale skin. But when she blinked, her reflection didn't. Its lips twitched into a faint, knowing smile. Elif stumbled back, her chair scraping against the floor. No, you're not real, she whispered. The reflection leaned forward, pressing its hands against the other side of the glass. Its eyes were a deeper red now, veins spreading like cracks in porcelain. Don't fight me, it mouthed silently. The phone rang suddenly, shrill in the quiet. Elif grabbed it like a lifeline. It was her neighbor, Isla. Elif, are you all right? I heard noises last night, like someone screaming. Elif's throat went dry. She wanted to tell her everything, but how could she explain that her own reflection wanted her dead? I just had a nightmare. Elif lied. Don't worry. But Isla didn't sound convinced. Elif, don't go near the mirrors. I read something about an old ritual connected to this building. The line went dead before Elif could respond. Static bled into the silence, and from the corner of her eye, she saw movement. Her reflection was no longer confined to glass. It stood in the hallway, dripping with thick black fluid, its mouth stretched into a grotesque grin. Elif, it whispered, its voice layered with hers. It's time to come home. Elif locked herself in the living room, covering every reflective surface she could find. Mirrors, glass frames, even the television screen, with old sheets. The apartment looked like a place abandoned by the living, draped in ghostly shrouds. But no matter how careful she was, she kept hearing whispers. They didn't come from outside. They came from the walls, from the glass hidden beneath the cloth, from inside herself. Elif! The voice was identical to hers, but heavier, like it carried centuries of hunger. She clutched her phone, scrolling desperately for answers. Isla's message from earlier played in her head. A ritual connected to this building. Searching old archives online, Elif discovered the truth. Decades ago, the building had been constructed on the remains of a burned-down mansion. The family who lived there were rumored to practice mirror-binding rituals, dark ceremonies meant to trap souls and reflections, feeding them until they grew strong enough to step into the world again. Her stomach sank. It isn't just me. This thing, it's always been here. Waiting. The sheets began to stir, though no wind blew. One by one, they slid off, revealing the mirrors underneath. In each one, her reflection was closer, clearer, more solid. Then came the knock, a slow, deliberate pounding at her front door. "Elif, it's me. Isla, let me in." Her heart raced. She peered through the peephole. Isla stood there, trembling, eyes darting nervously. But in the mirror across the hall, Elif saw something different. Isla's reflection wasn't trembling at all. It was smiling. The pounding grew louder, more violent. "Elif, open the door now." Her breath came fast, every instinct screaming not to move. But whether she stayed locked inside or opened the door, she knew she was trapped between two horrors. The creature in the mirrors and whatever stood outside pretending to be Isla. The glass around her began to crack. The pounding on the door stopped. Silence. Elif's chest heaved as she stood frozen, every muscle screaming. Then crack. The largest mirror in the living room split down the center. Her reflection didn't shatter with it. Instead, it stepped forward. The air turned icy as the thing emerged, peeling itself away from the glass like skin tearing from bone. Its face was hers, but drained of warmth, pale and wet as though soaked in blood. Its eyes were empty voids, yet they seemed to see more than Elif ever could. Finally, it whispered with her voice, "You've given me enough." The door burst open. Isla stumbled in, but not the Isla Elif knew. Her body twisted, her movements unnatural. She turned her head at an impossible angle, smiling with jagged teeth. "You thought you could hide," Isla's broken voice said. "But the mirrors belong to us all." Elif backed away until her spine pressed against the wall. Both the reflection and Isla moved closer, in perfect unison, as if choreographed. Desperation filled her. She grabbed a shard of glass from the broken mirror, its edge still glistening with her own blood. "If you're me," she whispered, her voice trembling, "then you'll die with me." She plunged a shard into her own chest. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then the apartment exploded with screams. Not hers, but theirs. The reflection convulsed, its body splitting into 100 fractured faces, all howling. Isla's form collapsed, her body crumbling like shattered glass. Elif fell to her knees, blood soaking the floor. Her vision blurred, but through the haze she saw the mirrors around her going dark, one by one. The reflections faded, swallowed by shadow. Her last thought before the cold took her was a bitter whisper. "I was never looking at them. They were always looking at me." The room fell silent. Only the cracked mirrors remained, waiting for the next face foolish enough to stare too long.